Before we delve into the depth of the apartheid era, it's crucial to understand what South Africa was like before this dark period. South Africa's history is a rich tapestry woven from the threads of numerous tribes and cultures. The Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, and many other tribes coexisted, each with their unique customs, languages, and traditions. In the 17th century, the landscape began to change with the arrival of Dutch settlers, later known as the Boers. They established the Cape Colony, and over time, the indigenous tribes found themselves progressively displaced from their ancestral lands. The 19th century brought another wave of European settlers, this time from Britain, igniting a series of conflicts with the Boers, known as the Anglo-Boer Wars. These conflicts culminated in the establishment of the Union of South Africa in 1910, under British rule. The Union, however, was far from a unified nation. It was a divided society with deep-rooted racial disparities. The white minority, comprising mainly of British and Dutch descendants, held political power and owned the majority of the land. The vast majority of the population, the black Africans, were marginalized, facing economic and social exclusion. These disparities and tensions were not new, but they were about to be codified in a way that would change the course of South African history forever. So by 1948, South Africa was a boiling pot of racial tension, and this set the stage for the implementation of the apartheid regime. In 1948, the National Party came to power and introduced a policy that would forever scar South Africa: apartheid. This policy was more than just a political strategy. It was a systematic approach to segregate and oppress the non-white population of the country. The apartheid, a term rooted in the Afrikaans language meaning apartness, laid the groundwork for the institutionalization of racial segregation. The government began to enact laws that were designed to enforce this separation of races. These laws were not just limited to public spaces and social interactions, but they extended to every facet of life, from housing and education to employment and even marriage. One such law was the Population Registration Act of 1950, which classified South Africans into 4 racial categories: white, black, colored, and Indian. This law was the foundation upon which the rest of the apartheid structure was built. It dictated where individuals could live, work, and even who they could marry. Another oppressive law was the Group Areas Act of 1950, which designated specific residential and business sections in urban areas for each racial group. This law led to forced removals of non-white South Africans from their homes to segregated neighborhoods, often in the most undesirable parts of the country. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 was another tool of oppression. It established a curriculum that was designed to limit the aspirations of the black population, reinforcing the notion that they were destined for menial labor. Living under the apartheid regime was a daily struggle for non-white South Africans. They were subjected to routine humiliations, systematic oppression, and a constant denial of their basic human rights. The government's relentless pursuit to maintain white domination in South Africa was marked by a flagrant disregard for the dignity and equality of the majority of its population. The apartheid regime was a system of institutionalized racism that sought to maintain white domination in South Africa. But the human spirit is resilient, and the oppressed majority did not remain silent. In the shadow of apartheid, the people of South Africa found strength in unity. They rallied against the oppressive regime, transforming their collective suffering into a powerful force of resistance. This resistance took many forms, including peaceful protests, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience. One such act was the Defiance Campaign of the early 1950s, where the African National Congress, known as the ANC, mobilized the masses to openly defy apartheid laws. The campaign was marked by nonviolent resistance, but it set the stage for more radical forms of protest in the years to come. Then, as the 60s dawned, the Pan-Africanist Congress, or PAC, organized a protest against the pass laws in Sharpeville. In what came to be known as the Sharpeville Massacre, 69 black South Africans were killed by police, sparking international outrage and turning the global spotlight onto the horrors of apartheid. The mid-70s saw the emergence of another pivotal moment in the struggle against apartheid, the Soweto Uprising. Tens of thousands of black students took to the streets to protest the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in schools. The protest was met with brutal force, and the image of a dying 13-year-old Hector Peterson shot by the police became a haunting symbol of the brutality of apartheid. In the face of such violence, the resistance movement did not falter. Instead, it evolved, growing more organized and more determined. The ANC, now banned and operating underground, adopted a strategy of armed struggle. The Black Consciousness movement, led by Steve Biko, championed psychological liberation, urging Black South Africans to reject the internalized racism of apartheid. Through all these forms of resistance, the oppressed majority continued to fight for their rights, their dignity, and their freedom. They endured brutal crackdowns, mass incarcerations, and state-sponsored violence, but they remained undeterred, their resolve only strengthening with each passing year. In the face of brutal repression, the struggle for freedom and equality continued to gain momentum. Among the voices that rose against apartheid, one stood out for its courage and conviction: Nelson Mandela. Born in a small village in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, Rolihlahla Mandela, later known as Nelson, was the first in his family to attend school. From these humble beginnings, he grew to become a beacon of hope for a nation. In his early 20s, Mandela moved to Johannesburg, where he first encountered the brutal realities of apartheid. It was here that he joined the African National Congress, or ANC, and began his lifelong fight for equality. Mandela's activism didn't go unnoticed by the oppressive regime. In 1962, he was arrested for conspiring against the state. During his riveting speech at the Rivonia trial, he declared, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Mandela's conviction and unyielding spirit echoed in the hearts of millions. Despite the global outcry, Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent 27 long years behind bars, most of them at the infamous Robben Island. His cell was a tiny, bleak space, but Mandela never let his spirit be confined. He continued his studies, nurtured relationships with prison guards, and even wrote part of his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. Mandela's imprisonment became a poignant symbol of resistance against apartheid. The chant "Free Nelson Mandela" rang out in protests worldwide. His unbroken spirit and unwavering commitment to equality inspired a global movement, and in the face of mounting international pressure, the apartheid regime was forced to capitulate. In 1990, Mandela walked out of prison a free man. His release was not merely the end of his personal struggle, but a turning point for South Africa. It marked the beginning of the end of apartheid and the start of a journey towards a more just and inclusive nation. Mandela's imprisonment became a symbol of the struggle against apartheid, and his release in 1990 marked a turning point in South Africa's history. With the release of Nelson Mandela, the winds of change began to blow in South Africa. No longer a prisoner, but a symbol of hope, Mandela stood at the helm, steering his nation towards a future of equality and justice. The end of apartheid was not an overnight event. It was a process, a negotiation that required courage, patience, and unwavering resolve. In the early 90s, negotiations to end apartheid were underway. Mandela, along with other leaders, worked tirelessly to dismantle the system of racial segregation. These conversations were delicate, often fraught with tension, but they were necessary. They marked the beginning of a long journey towards racial equality, a journey that South Africa had to embark on. And then, in 1994, a momentous event took place: the first democratic elections. These elections were more than just a political event. They were a testament to the power of resilience, a symbol of the will of a people to rise above years of oppression. The lines of voters, stretching as far as the eye could see, were a sight to behold. For the first time in South Africa's history, all its citizens, regardless of color, had the right to vote. Out of this landmark election, Nelson Mandela emerged as South Africa's first black president. His presidency was marked by his commitment to reconciliation. He understood that for South Africa to move forward, it had to heal from its past. Mandela's leadership was not without its challenges. The nation he presided over was deeply divided, scarred by years of racial segregation and riddled with economic inequality. But Mandela, with his characteristic determination and grace, led his nation through these turbulent times. There were notable achievements during his presidency. Mandela established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a crucial step in acknowledging and addressing the atrocities committed during the apartheid era. He also spearheaded efforts to combat poverty and to improve the living conditions of South Africa's black majority. Nelson Mandela's rise from prisoner to president is a testament to the power of resilience and the pursuit of justice. He led South Africa out of the shadows of apartheid and into a new era of hope and reconciliation. His legacy, the story of a man who fought against injustice, who led his nation towards a future of equality, will forever be etched in the annals of history.